Hello and welcome to Minivangelism, the driver's seat, where we talk about the Bible without the kids in the car. If you got kids in the car, switch over to a regular Minivangelism episode. This one is for parents only. In today's episode, we are talking about Jacob wrestling with God, but you will also hear us talk about
Stone Cold Steve Austin
and
the Morality Olympics.
And finally, groin injuries.
Oh boy.
We're glad you're here.
All right, let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. We're glad that you're here. Today, we are talking about the story of Jacob wrestling naked. Right?
I assume that's
what original Greco-Roman wrestling. It was, I'm pretty sure, like oiled up and naked.
It was very. Have you looked at any artwork depicting Jacob wrestling?
Some.
It made me uncomfortable.
That's fair.
Like it shouldn't be allowed on Wikipedia because yes, I did do most of my theological research on Wikipedia.
Nice.
And it's
graphic.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Not graphic. It's just I didn't realize that Jacob was so built.
Yeah.
I mean,
he was a grabber. Yes, indeed. What's the weightlifting move? That's the clean and jerk. Yeah. Did plenty of those too. Yeah.
Jesus.
I know. You started it.
I did start it.
So, but Wikipedia is not how you first inherited this story.
It is not how I first inherited this story.
How did you first inherit the story?
It's like I inherited all my Bible stories in Sunday school at my church.
A VHS tape?
It was not a VHS tape.
Okay.
I did. Did you ever watch wrestling as a kid?
A bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was one of the things that my parents were like, we're not going to watch that.
Oh, yeah. No, we didn't watch it a lot.
It was big. Like, we're both 90s kids, so It was big.
Yes. Every kid, I grew up in the South, and every kid in my second grade class had a rat tail and a Stone Cold Steve Austin t-shirt.
Absolutely.
Like, that's just what.
And you remember when Suck It was a thing? Yeah, everybody did the arms over the groin.
Yes.
Also relevant to the Jacob story, but we'll get that later.
Oh, jeez.
It is. I'm not even kidding.
No, but yeah, so it's such a weird, just random story, right? Like you're going through Jacob's life, and this is not his first encounter with an angel.
Yeah.
Right? Like he has a dream.
Right.
While he's sleeping on a pillow. Yeah. And angels are going up and down. And then like we're just talking about the Jacob story. And then it was kind of like, oh yeah, and he wrestled an angel on the side of the river.
Yeah.
Moving on. You know what I mean? Like it's just there.
That sounds like a John Henry, legend.
Yeah.
Jacob once wrestled with an angel on the seashore. Yeah.
And I think it was like I got it. I heard this story for it being such a short little blip in Genesis. It is one that I feel like I heard a lot and was referenced a lot. Mm-hmm. Growing up. And I think I was in like middle school when it was finally like, oh, this was a pre-incarnate Christ.
Oh, wow.
Is what I was told.
That's cool.
And so it was Jesus. So like now I have this vision of just, like, and here comes Jesus with the chair.
I like Jesus with the headgear, the wrestling headgear with the big ears.
I was thinking
and the
more
onesie.
more like Hulk Hogan do-rag.
That's fair.
I
like my Jesus. I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's good.
And so, and so I was told that it was like, he was wrestling with the pre-incarnate Christ, and that like Jesus makes, but it was kind of it was in like a series of like Jesus making, I guess, like cameo appearances in the Old Testament.
Yeah. So brief explainer, pre-incarnate Christ kind of is a part of the Christian tradition of looking for Jesus to show up like in spirit, like anything that reminds us of Jesus. But part of the early church tradition is to read the Old Testament and notice when someone shows up that acts like Jesus, and say, if Jesus is co-eternal with God the Father, and Jesus is the one in whom God takes flesh, anytime that God is like taking on flesh or showing up in person, we can basically say that is Jesus.
Right.
It's not really like literally that was Jesus, but the spirit that was in Jesus is in this moment.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a Where's Waldo?
Sure.
Like, where's Jesus in
Yeah.
this story?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
It's a great way to read the Bible.
And so, it wasn't really just like, once again, we didn't really go into like a deep dive of necessarily what it meant, but it was just, this is a part of the story.
Yeah.
And you need to know this part of the story. What about you, though? How did you inherit it?
I think, so I was raised by two pastors. So we talked about God at times when no one but my parents wanted to talk about God. And I feel like I have a memory of my mom talking about this story when I was wrestling with my own faith.
Oh.
And kind of normalizing what I was going through. And so, but that was probably early adolescence. I mean, it's kind of cool that like Reagan's, the kid we interviewed, is doing this now. I don't think it's ever too soon. And I also think it's part of like faith development, is getting to the point where you do have questions or you are wrestling with something or other. But this story was kind of offered to me, like it ministered to me to understand that like that's what I was going through. And that felt, I remember at the time, it felt like very accurate. That's what this felt like, is wrestling with God to figure out, am I going to believe in you or not? Like, am I going to stay a Christian or not? Like that kind of relatively high stakes for like a 12-year-old, you know,
Right.
But that's what it felt like.
That's so different than the read. I think it is just because the environment I grew up with is, what do you mean you're wrestling with your faith?
Yeah.
Like, that's not an option.
Yeah. We don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about doubts.
No.
Yeah.
It's just a wrestling match.
Yeah. It's just a wrestling match. You're just going to lose. And
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that's worth pointing out, is that people might have inherited this in different traditions, where it could have been, look at Jacob, how unholy he is. He thinks he can wrestle God. Or it could be like, look at Jacob. He's just like us. We all wrestle with God. And I tend toward the latter, especially now.
I don't think it was necessarily that Jacob was doing a bad thing when he wrestled God. It was like, look how tough Jacob is.
Oh, cool.
Right? Like, of course this guy's good. This guy was brave enough to like wrestle God. You know what I mean?
But I think like the big reveal about that is like, look how tough he is. And also remember, he's a jerk. So like, you don't necessarily want to emulate this guy.
No.
Because he's stealing from family. You know, he's tricking his blind father out of an inheritance. So like, he's not a moral exemplar necessarily.
No.
But he might be a mortal exemplar. Like he might be, this is part of what it means to be human, is sometimes it'd be like this.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I love that.
What makes you uncomfortable about the story as you read it now?
Just the boldness of Jacob.
The boldness?
Boldness. Like the boldness of him just thinking that you can wrestle God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that makes me a little uncomfortable. Also seeing, it's so weird because it's like you have this in early Genesis, especially, you know, we talked about this in Noah. You have this violent God, right? And then here in this example, once again, you have a violent God. You know, I mean, he's not smiting. Once again, I mentioned that in the other one. He's not smiting, but it's just such a weird story of like, who was that? Was it Pink Panther?
I don't know.
The guy that had the like, he had like hired someone where it was like every time he turned the lights off, he'd get attacked. Like there was like this like old like spy show. Somebody please correct me on this by writing in, where it was like every time he would like turn the lights off, like somebody would like come out of nowhere and attack him. And like that's kind of what I think about this, is just Jacob's like, I'm gonna go get a good night's sleep before I see my brother, and then like boom, like there's somebody coming and wrestling him.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting. I can't quite nod my head when we talk about God being a violent God. And maybe I should get there. I get that it looks like violence. But part of me feels like violence is inherently like annihilating or destroying. And God seems to be up to something different.
Yeah.
So I understand and value the, hold on, this doesn't look like God. And I don't think that the conclusion is ultimately that God is violent. But that might just be my own stuff because it just might be my own stuff.
Well, I think it too might be like a dude read on it.
Yeah.
Because I wrestled with my little brother and stuff when I was little, but like ultimately, like rough housing and stuff is something that I was taught like we don't do. You know what I mean? Whereas you had a brother and rough housing was just something that's expected.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do you think that like wrestling looks like something that is immoral for God to do or just beneath God to do?
I think beneath.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's so, once again, it's just this like humanization
right.
of God. And it's just as we've been like
I like that
recording part. This, I know. But like, and I think, and I'm coming around to it.
Sure.
But it's just like as I've been revisiting Genesis and especially, for this. Yeah, it's just I'm seeing God, I guess, in the way that he wants to be seen. I don't know. It's just
I think
like people talking back to God, people arguing with God, people physically fighting God. You know what I mean? It makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that's fair. I like Jacob. Didn't want to necessarily get into this with the kids, but I kind of like Jacob's entitlement. Because there's a simplicity to the faith. Now, like, I don't like his trickery, but his sense, like, no, you were supposed to bless me. Mm-hmm. Like, I think there's a holy entitlement there. Yeah. That's like a simple faith that says, you said this is going to happen, and I'm here to call you on it. Like, I'm here to take you at your word, that I actually like. And I've heard it in some of the most faithful people that I know, like, saying, no, God is going to bless me. And God knows that I'm just waiting until that happens. And in the meantime, we'll have words, but like, I kind of like that as a definition of faith, is expecting God to keep God's promises. Yeah. If we can't do that, then I'm not sure we can believe,
Do you think that Jacob, at any point, because he was so entitled, was like never afraid of like, I'm the chosen one. You're not going to kill me right now. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good I wonder question too. Like, was Jacob freaked out or afraid in the midst of this encounter? It seems like he's kind of got tunnel vision on, he's just determined to get this blessing. Yeah. And he's been able to get himself out of everything that happened beforehand. So, I think that the injuring of his hip is the humbling wound that God gives Jacob, just to say, look, man, some bad things can happen to you. You can get hurt. You're not invincible. You're not Superman. You can't get out of everything. You can't get out of every situation. You're going to walk away with a blessing, but you're going to carry a limp, so that there's never any doubt where you stand in the authority, hierarchy of things. I'm still God. You are not.
And I'm wondering too if it gave him a little bit of vulnerability going to meet Esau. You know what I mean? Like you're walking up and you're already injured, and now you're going to go. Yeah. You're at Esau's mercy at that point.
Yeah, because you can imagine, like, if your two kids are fighting, and you want them, and you're going to put them back together. Do you want them to put them back together when they're scared and trying to get out of it? Or do you want to put them back together when, for whatever reason, they've been humbled? Like, I do think that kind of reconciliation requires some humility or humiliation so that reconciliation can happen. Part of me thinks that if this hadn't happened, Jacob would have approached Esau with guns drawn. Just assumed that Esau's coming in hot, I'm going to come in hotter. But because of this encounter, I too wonder, maybe he's just limping up and saying, let's just talk, Yeah.
And he's exhausted. He's been up all night.
Yeah, of course.
What makes you uncomfortable about the story?
One thing is the fact that in the Hebrew, Jacob's injury is directly to his groin.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
I didn't get that version.
His hip is knocked out of joint because he's hit in the nape of his leg, or a nape of his thigh. And the Hebrew scholars all say that means he took one to the nuts, like 100%.
Oh no, not the nut tap.
Yeah. And not just the tap. Like,
oh no.
I've received plenty of collegiate nut tap and never dislocated my hip because of it. So this is a blow to the groin. And that's uncomfortable just to think about in the first place. And there's nothing more humbling.
I'll take your word for it.
Nothing more humbling. But what's cool about that and interesting about that is, again, to put this in context with God's intent to fill the earth with life. Like the blessing is going to be children. And what God momentarily jeopardizes is, like, he hits them where it counts. He hits them at the location of the blessing.
Oh my gosh.
Is I have given you this blessing and I could take it away. So it's a very specific wound that is intended to, I think, humble Jacob at some point, but also make Jacob aware of what God is doing, like of God's intent to fill the earth with life.
Right.
And so that's the point where that future is jeopardized, or where Jacob is humbled. And when I learned that, like every guy, I was just like, oh.
So when you ask, like, what makes you uncomfortable about the story, it's like physical discomfort.
Yes,
It's what makes you uncomfortable about the story.
It hasn't happened too many times, but it doesn't take long to recall. It's not fun and immediately humbling. Yeah. So I wonder if there are other, you always come with the ancient narratives that rhyme.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah. So what you got today?
Okay. So there are two. One is from around this time. So oldest written text that we have is the Sumerian text of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Yeah. Right. It's like the first story. It predates all of this. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh is this king, and he's like real big for his britches, and he's like super violent, and the gods are, even though he's like a demigod, like they're very like unimpressed with him. So they send this creature called Enkidu to humble Gilgamesh. So Enkidu is like raised in the forest, and like he's just this like super strong like man ape guy, but then he like becomes human. It's a long thing. But Gilgamesh hears about Enkidu hears about Gilgamesh and like how violent he is, and he's like, this guy needs to be humbled. Like that's literally what he is sent to do, is to humble him. And he rolls up and he humbles him through a wrestling match.
Oh, awesome.
Like that's what they do. Like they wrestle.
Yeah.
And Gilgamesh, like this is the first creature that Gilgamesh has like encountered that actually matches him strength for strength. And ultimately it ends in a tie. Nobody wins, just like in this story in Genesis, like nobody really wins. But there's this respect, and then like Enkidu becomes Gilgamesh's like lifelong best friend. And they like go and they fight giants together, and like it's a whole thing. And then awesome. Enkidu's death makes Gilgamesh want immortality, and then he meets the Noah character. It's like a whole thing. But anyway, like there are a lot of like Genesis stories reflected in this story.
Yeah.
So that's one. And then another is in Greek mythology, because you know that's my jam. Peleus, the father of Achilles, the great warrior, he actually marries Achilles' mother because he beats her in a wrestling match.
Nice.
So Thetis is this nymph, and the gods tell Peleus, like, if you can hold on to her for however long, like you can marry her. It's patriarchy.
The Bachelorette.
Yes. He's like, can I steal you for a second? And so he gets her in like this full Nelson, and she changes shapes because she's a sea nymph. So she can like, and so she like turns into a snake and like a lion and a bear. Like she changes into all these different creatures. But Peleus is like super, super strong. And so ultimately he like is able to hold on to her until she exhausts herself out, and then they get married, and then they birth Achilles, who becomes, you know, like the great warrior with the bad heel. So yeah, so those are two just examples. But I think the Gilgamesh one like really reflects what's going on in Genesis.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked to know that like it's in the air when they're writing this story down.
Right. Well, and it's the same parts of the world.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the Sumerians and the Epic of Gilgamesh comes from like Mesopotamia.
Right.
Which is just that part of the world.
Yeah.
That everything else is going on in.
And so what do you notice when you hold the stories up to each other? Like what's the Genesis story doing differently or trying to say?
You've got two characters where Gilgamesh is a demigod and Jacob is just the chosen one, right? They're both super misogynistic. And they are both just not good guys. And so somebody has to come along and humble them, right? And they're messengers of the gods in one story and the messenger of the god in the other story. And they're both humbled. Like everything ends in a tie. Blessing. And then the tie between Jacob and God, right? His like full reliance on God following this story. Because correct me if I'm wrong, like post wrestling match, Jacob doesn't really like get into too much. It's his sons that then start picking up.
That's right.
The story.
Yeah, he seems to be like permanently humbled and a little messed up.
Right. And in the Gilgamesh story, it's like him and Enkidu, like they're tied together now, right? Like they depend on one another to achieve glory. And there's a lot of messed up stuff in that story, but but I love when stories in the ancient world overlap like that, and then you can learn from them, and it just kind of sheds light on stuff.
That's great. And I feel like maybe if you feel like you walk in the door and you're not sure which animal your spouse is going to be this day, that maybe this story says just hold on. Just hold on.
Yeah. Well, in that story, the only really tie together is the messed up limbs, right? Like Jacob's got the messed up hip, and then like their son has the messed up heel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Nice. There you go.
That's the only tie together. But taking it back to the Bible.
Sure.
This is something we talked about in Minivangelism, and it was something that I was like, oh, do I bring this up in Minivangelism or do I say it in the driver's seat? Reagan asked this great question of, did anybody else fight God? And we talked about, how really the only person that carried out violence against God would have been in the New Testament with Jesus. And I love how even in that story, it ends with the person fighting God receiving a blessing. Yeah. Right? Like Jesus is on the cross and they don't even ask for it. Like Jacob demanded his blessing, but Jesus, I mean, he blesses the thief, right? That asks for it. But
and he prays for the forgiveness of those that don't know what they're doing.
But everybody else doesn't ask for forgiveness. They don't ask for a blessing, but he's going to give it anyway. Right. And I loved that kind of realization. Right. You know what I mean? Of just, that God is there and he's got something for you. He's got a promise for you.
Yeah. And part of the Genesis commentary, I think, is this blessing, God's blessing, is a gift. Mm-hmm. And it can't really be understood. It can't really be received by any other means. Mm-hmm. It can only really be received as a gift. Mm-hmm. Like you can't just reach out and grasp it. You also can't kill God. Yeah. And get out of receiving the particular blessing that God has. That God is determined to give this gift. Right. And so like there's two sides of that. One is it doesn't matter what you do, God's still going to give you the gift. It's also you cannot earn this gift on your own terms. Right. It can really only be taken in the humility of one who's receiving a gift. Yeah. Like I don't really even like getting presents because for whatever reason, it's just my go-to emotion. Like they make me feel guilty. Like I can't pay you back. You didn't have to do this. I'm now worried. Can I say thank you sufficiently for you to know that I thank you? Like I have a whole complex about that. You're going to tell me to go to therapy.
No, I'm not. I'm just thinking of like, okay, now I know how I can make him really uncomfortable. Yeah. That's just another like tool for my arsenal.
Like I'm not that great at receiving gifts and simply accepting them. Like I feel like that's actually part of my like life's spiritual work.
Sorry, I'm just gonna make an Amazon list. It's like my Drew's humility list. Like, what are things? Yeah.
And I think that's part of like that's some of the Jacob that I have in me is I don't like the nice way of saying is I don't want anybody to have to do anything for me. Because I don't want them to be put out. The other is I only really believe in something that I've been able to accomplish myself. And that seems to be Jacob-esque. And part of what the story says is, sorry, dude, like you just have to open your hand and I'm going to give you this and you have to accept it. Like that's how this works, which is tough.
Do you think that the man, but ultimately, what should we be calling the wrestler? Because they just refer to him by so many different names in the Bible. It's the man, an angel. I think it's Hosea is the first one that actually like points out that it was a messenger of God, right? Like when he says your name will be Israel, which means wrestles with God, like that's one. But I think it's Hosea where we start getting into like this was somebody supernatural and not just like a mortal person.
But the Jacob's opponent is called different things within these few verses too.
Yeah.
So you can just say the man or the wrestler or God. I mix it up. Yeah.
Okay. So
and like later Jesus says, I am Pilate says about Jesus, here is the man. So they all work for Jesus.
Yeah. So when Stone Cold Steve Austin is approaching, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I was trying to think like, what is Jesus's wrestler name? I don't know.
I mean, there was that whole like Austin 316. Anyway, so grew up in the deep South.
Yeah.
So do you think though, when Jacob went over there and the man approached him, do you think that he approached him like ready to fight, or was he just there to have a conversation and then Jacob was like, fight me?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, okay, here we go. Like
the way I imagine it, like I don't want to over psychologize, but like the way I imagine it is the man shows up and Jacob immediately knows what's going on because he's being given an external way to do what's happening internally. So it's like Jacob has already sent everybody else away. He has sent his own army, his own everything, like in the hopes that in some sense to show Esau, you might not want to kill me because I've got all this backing me up. In another sense, he's procrastinating. He's sending everybody so he can go last. And he's got this internal struggle. And then suddenly there's a person shows up in a onesie and a headgear and he's like, yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it. That's how I imagine it. It's like, it's such an internal wrestling match that when there's someone to actually wrestle, I know what's going on. I'm ready to do it.
Gotcha.
But I could be wrong about that. That's just kind of my sense.
Sorry, you talking about like him sending along. This is a very like ping, 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 ping
That's
conversation. When I was growing up, one of the times that this story was referenced was him sending the people ahead was another example of Jacob's almost cowardice. And just like this guy, like because he sends his servants ahead and then like the way he sends the wives and children across, it's like he does like least favorite to favorite. But he still keeps himself in the back, almost like I'll have time to escape. I know I can make 12 kids. So like I have time. Yeah. And so he just kind of like sacrifices all of them. That's potentially.
Jacob.
Yeah.
He's who you would expect to be using a human shield. Like,
and it's his own wives and children.
Yeah. He's not a good guy.
No.
And like, thank God that we have this story.
Yeah.
About God insisting to bless an a-hole.
Yes.
To save us from the explicit rating if I can.
Yes.
Like this is a picture of God that we need.
Yeah.
We are not rooting for Jacob.
No.
God is. And that's instructive.
Yeah. And I think that just speaks back to like, I guess the discomfort that I have with so many of these stories is because I was so like, I really try this. How do I say this without sounding narcissistic? I feel like there's just this expectation that you have to be so good, right? And it's almost kind of like blessing and God's favor and stuff is transactional. Right. I know that it's not. but this is my internal struggle. This is
Yeah.
why I have to go to therapy, right? It's transactional. And when I see all of these examples of imperfect people
Getting blessed up.
for fighting, right? It's
Right.
frustrating.
Yeah. It's worth pointing out how, like, the gospel for a-holes like me
Yeah,
looks like looks like injustice to people, to like the wives and the children who are the human shields.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I like how you and I have like two very different reads on this.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I can't be like Jacob. And you're like, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, thank God there's grace for Jacob. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I think, like, God saves Noah because Noah's good.
Yeah.
God saves Jacob because, damn it, I'm going to save Jacob.
Mhm.
You know? And again, the analogy to parenthood comes up there,
Right.
where God seems to be able to still love the a-hole kid, and certainly wants to preserve and help the good kid.
Yeah.
God seems to have an unconditional positive regard.
Mhm.
And as long as we're jockeying for God's favor, it's going to look unfair.
Right.
And like, that's a whole lot of, I think, what sin is like jockeying for God's favor or for our own favor or what have you. And that's just it's not the economy that God is working in.
No.
But I think it's also fair to say, like, dang it, God, that person doesn't deserve to have your blessing. Why are you doing that? That's fair.
Yeah.
Like, that's a fair thing to say. This is what we're wrestling about today during my prayers on my commute, is F those guys. Why do you love them at all?
Yeah.
That's a good prayer.
Yeah. And I think too, we've talked about in the last couple episodes about how becoming a parent has kind of made me see God differently.
Yeah.
And because I do have two very different children. I have one child who is going to go above and beyond to just do the right thing. Like we went to King's Dominion, this theme park that's near where we live, and I had stuck some granola bars. This was when my youngest was still in pull-ups. I had stuck some granola bars in the pull-ups because, see, when they check your bag, because you can't bring in outside food, check the bag, they don't look at the pull-ups, right? So I stuck some granola bars in there, and we get in the car, and my oldest was like, "Can I have a snack?" And so I reach in my purse and I grab a granola bar out. And she was like, "Why are they in the pull-ups?" And I was like, "Oh, so we can carry them into the park." And she was like, "You're not allowed to have food in the park." And for the hour it took us to get to the theme park, she convinced us to take the granola bars out.
Absolutely.
Because that was against the rules, right?
Yes.
Whereas I have another kid who is going to be like, she's very much my Jacob.
Yeah.
Of like, I'm entitled to this, and so I'm going to get it. And no matter who I hurt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like, Mom, I know I don't wear pull-ups anymore. I went ahead and put one on so we can put snacks in there.
Exactly. Yeah. That's my second one. And especially now, because my youngest is 4, my oldest is 9. My 9-year-old is really grappling with the whole like, but she did it wrong. Why are you being so kind to her? And why do you love her? And why do you forgive her for this? You know what I mean? When like, I've worked so hard, Yeah,
I think that's fair. That's a real. And it doesn't go away after childhood.
It doesn't. But now I'm like seeing it like, okay, well, it's because I still love this little one unconditionally, right? I love you both unconditionally, no matter what you do. And I definitely see God coming into play here. And
God's job is not simply the rewarding of the righteous.
No.
And the cursing of the unrighteous. Like, and your role as a parent is not just to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior.
Right.
Your job as a parent is to raise children.
Right.
Like, that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly in Genesis, like, God is trying to do something that's more important than whether you're worthy or not.
Right.
And so we naturally, I think, get stuck in the worthiness question.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another thing going on that's beneath all of that, or above all of that, that God is doing, where that whole question of morality is smaller than the question of the will of God. And again, I think that's good news for me. It might be bad news for all your holy people out there, but
No, here's the thing is that nobody can be holy, right?
right.
Like nobody can be truly holy. And I think that it's an uncomfortable relief.
Right.
To you know what I mean?
And it's part of why in a lot of Christian writing, like part of what we point to about Jesus is that he seems to be anti-religious. Like he seems to constantly undermine the morality Olympics. And Martin Luther especially will say like Jesus is the end of that kind of religion.
Right.
That's Jesus reveals that God is up to something totally different than that.
Right.
And I think that's a lesson that has to be learned in every generation.
Yeah.
And we're still figuring that out. So much of the religions that we inherit or that actually gets to be part of the public imagination is actually the morality Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
People assume that that's what religion is. That people assume that's what God is. I think part of what looking closely at the Bible shows us is that no, actually there's a different game going on.
Right.
And it's a game where everybody wins, like regardless of how they play the game. So I think that's a major insight. And I really wish that people knew that what we do as like Christian leaders is so much more than training people for the morality Olympics.
Right.
And I it's not possible for me to like, I can't put that in a Facebook post or something. Like I can't convince people of that.
Yeah.
But it's part of why I love what we do, is because in some sense we get to free people from the morality Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And in biblical language, give them a different crown. Like, here's your medal. God won it for you.
Right.
Even though you came in last, or even though you thought you came in first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that too. Like when you, when I got hired here, one of the things you like said about like the approach to children's ministry was like, we're not here for, I can't remember like the exact words the vocabulary you used, but it was like, we're not here to teach like good citizenship.
Yeah.
Right. Or like ethics, because they get enough of that at school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how to be a good person, like how to be a good boy, how to be a good girl, like or a good girl. Like that's not what we're here about. Like we're here to teach them about like God's love and God's grace and I've fully supported that. You know what I mean? And understood that. And I think now if you haven't been able to pick up from that in our conversation, I think I wish I had more of that growing up, of just like, not necessarily morality training, but mercy, acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not to say like people don't need moral formation. They
No.
They do. It's just that the gospel is different than that.
Yeah. We are not saying like go and do whatever the heck you want.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, you can try it. It's not going to go well for you. But especially like, I think especially part of what the church can give children is something that's deeper than the morality Olympics. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, if we could do all of that we want, and part of the nature of humanity is that they're going to grow up thinking, oh, life is a morality Olympics and I've got to get the best grade or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just part of what Jacob is trying to do. Yeah. He's trying to win at life. And ultimately he comes up against the hard body of wrestling Jesus and can't win it on his own terms.
Right.
He has to be given it as a gift.
Right.
And I think that probably happens in every life of faith, and probably more than once.
We can cut this, but what would be your event in the morality Olympics?
Cheating. I would be the Jacob that took the shortcut on the marathon, or yeah. What about you?
That would be I asked you because I thought you'd have a longer answer.
No, I would just be like Jacob.
Just cheat though.
But it would be very important that nobody knew I was cheating. Like I would want to get away with it.
Oh, I think encouragement would be mine. Like, you know what I mean? If you can get a medal for just like hyping people up, right?
Yeah. Oh, you're a gold medalist in that.
Thanks.
Yeah. That's good.
I'll take one, because you complimented me. I'll take one item off the gift list.
So, if and when we talk to our kids about this, what do you want us to keep in mind?
First of all, I want to discourage the wrestling aspect of it, because violence is never the answer. And I'm just kidding. I think when talking to my kids about this one, I loved talking to Reagan, because when I sat down with her, because we mentioned this in the last episode I tell the parents, like, you can't prep your kids, right? And I sit down with Reagan and I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's talk about this. And she was like, Miss Hannah, I had to watch some YouTube videos because the story is weird.
That's awesome.
And I kind of like how I was given the story a little bit of just like, that's interesting, right? Jacob wrestled with a man. And then a little bit later, it's like, actually, that man was Jesus, right? And then showing them that he got blessed at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like focusing on that, like focusing on, I think, the blessing part of it, not necessarily the physical violence part of it.
Yeah.
And I do like how you said, your mom used as an example of when you were wrestling with your own faith. And I think when that does happen with my own kids, like if you introduce it to them young, you can call back to it. Of like, hey, remember that time I told you about Jacob wrestling on the side of a river? This is where it applies later on.
Yeah. And I even think if, to the degree that in anything like this, you want to give positive reinforcement, give positive reinforcement for the wrestling. Like say, it sounds like you're wrestling with God, and I'm so proud of you for wrestling with God and wrestling with these kind of questions. Like that means you're growing up and yet you believe enough to ask questions. And I'm really excited about that. Like, don't wait to reward until you come to a conclusion that you find acceptable. Like, but enjoy the wrestling itself. Because I think that's part of the point of the story is like, Israel is the people whose vocation, whose calling in the world is to wrestle with God and do so publicly.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the point is to believe and then say, help my unbelief. This is the part that's not working for me today, God. Or, and for kids to be able to say, but hold on a second, doesn't it say? And you say, yeah, it does. That's wild. Let's wrestle with that a little bit. Like, what do you think's going on? And let that be the event. And enjoy it for like as wrestling. The one part of that is like particularly strategic is that to the degree that we feel like we can't ask those questions, that means we're ripe for an internal conflict that could mean like a rupture in relationships, either the relationship with God or with my parents. So to the extent that anyone believes my parents can't handle my questions or God can't handle my questions, then you got to shut it down. And I think particularly in today's ex-evangelical movement, like that's part of what's going on is the church has at times handed people a faith that was so rigid that it was brittle. And when people come up with questions and are told, we can't handle that question, it just breaks.
And it's not because I'm skating along that movement. It's not so much we can't handle that question. It's you're wrong for having that question.
Yeah.
That there was no positive reinforcement for the wrestling.
Right.
It was just straight up, you shouldn't be having that.
Yeah.
That was not given to me directly, but I know a lot of people.
And it's like, it's in the air. It's
yeah.
like, it's in the air that it's wrong to question God. And I think what the Bible actually says is it's neither right or wrong. It just is like, that's part of what it means to be human. And ultimately like the good news, like, and the reason I'm saying this stuff, the theological reason is that God can handle it. Like we have a big enough God that one measly human's questions are not going to like make or break God's godness for you. Like God can handle your questions. God likes to wrestle. Like, look at this story. God God did it, and I imagine God wrestling with a smile on God's face the whole time.
Yeah.
Like it's okay.
And I kind of asked this earlier, but I'm just going to ask it again. Do you think he would have given Jacob the blessing wrestling match or not?
Oh yeah.
And I think that's
I think that's the promised future. Like God had already said, I am going to make your descendants many.
Yeah.
You are going to inherit a land.
Yeah.
Again, God is not a liar.
Yeah.
That's not on the line because God has said it. It is true.
Right.
That part of things is not on the line. Part of what's on the line is if Jacob will walk in the blessing or not.
Yeah. And I think that's just so important to remember is that God's got it.
Yeah.
He's got it. Ready?
Right.
He's waiting for you.
Right.
And having any kind of questions or doubts or worries, like that's not going to withhold. He's not going to withhold it because of your questions.
And if you're a listener and you're like, I don't really wrestle with God, I don't really question this stuff, that's okay too. Like that's
praise God.
Yeah.
Good for you. You know what I mean? I don't mean that sarcastically. Like
right.
I pray for a day that I can just finally tap out.
Yeah.
that the sun will rise, you
right.
know?
Yeah. So, blessings on whatever your faith feels like or is like right now.
Yeah.
The blessing of God is still promised for you regardless. Mm-hmm. And so whether that means you're wrestling to acceptance of it or whether that means you accepted it long ago and have never doubted it, great. Yeah. Bless you in the wrestling and in the peace of where the story goes, where Jacob is embraced by a brother who has chosen to forgive him.
Yeah.
That's our future regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I blame you
for
the wrestling match. Because you make me read my Bible in order to be good at my job.
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. And thank you.
Adds gift to cart.
Thank you to you, Anna, and to everybody for being a part of this conversation today. We are making plans for the next few episodes, and we might be moving out of Genesis. So please do follow us on Instagram so that you can get the latest information about that. And we look forward to being with you again. We hope that this is a blessing for you. And maybe if it's safe, you can go and plan to wrestle with your kids today, just for fun.
Yes.
And don't hit them in the groin or dislocate their hip. Try to keep them safe and just have fun. And
all
let the wrestling...
dads listening to this just got so excited, and all the moms are like, "Oh no!"
May all the wrestling be a blessing.
Yes.
Have a good day.
Yes, and don't forget, once again, he mentioned you can follow us on Instagram at Minivangelism. You can also send us an email to minivangelism@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you on just how we can make things better for you, and we can be a non-wrestled blessing to you and
That's
your
it.
house.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Minivangelism and the Driver's Seat are hosted by Anna Burrell and Drew Colby. Theme song written by David Burrell and produced by Evan Setzer. The theme song was performed by David Burrell, Drew Colby, and Evan Setzer. Podcast, sound design, and editing done by David Burrell. Minivangelism and the Driver's Seat are a ministry of Grace United Methodist Church in Manassas, Virginia. For more information, check out umcgrace.org.